I said. She told me we could have everything, and I believed her until I tasted metal in my mouth from the lie. The night smelt like rain and apology. Oh. Mara touched my wrist and said, "Trust me." My pulse answered faster than my mouth. We had rules written like vows on a napkin. Cole drafted them in neat lines. Jamie laughed at the ceremony of it. I laughed too, because courage is louder when the room is kind. Weeks blurred into quick kisses and bright mornings. I pretended jealousy was a rumor about me. Mara said, "No favorites." I nodded like a student. Jamie's name began living in our silences. Signals flashed in the corners of dinners. Phones face down became small coffins. I said, "Tell me if your heart leans." She kissed my eyelids instead. The apartment filled with soft lies that smelled like lotion. Cole said, "Boundaries keep us safe." I clung to that sentence like a life raft. Then Mara came home glowing like a streetlight. She said, "It felt easy with Jamie." The word easy sliced something tender. I smiled because I was trained for storms. Inside, a door blew off its hinges. I said, "I can handle this." The night answered with thunder. The confession began as a thread pulled from a sweater. I asked, "Did you choose her tonight?" Mara said, "I chose ease." The word sank like a stone in a shallow bowl. I remembered the napkin rules and their smug ink. Cole insisted clarity would save us. Jamie texted late, then stopped, then started again. I learned to read pauses like weather maps. We pretended the apartment was big enough for 3 shadows. I cooked dinner and plated courage with salt. Mara said, "I don't want to hurt you." I said, "Then say what hurts me anyway." She traced a circle on the table that looked like a ring. We were a house made of yes with windows of maybe. The air filled with soft kindness and hard truths. I kept my voice even because fury embarrassed me. Mara said, "I like who I am with her." I swallowed the old promise that we would not make favorites. Jealousy sat beside me and folded the napkin into a knife. I said, "Stay honest and I will try not to drown." The storm outside clapped like a witness. Somewhere, an easy version of us kept laughing. We wrote a new rule that night and pretended it was old. Cole said, "Transparency over kindness." I repeated it until the words tasted like chalk. Jamie asked to meet and talk like adults. I agreed because bravery wears the mask of manners. We met at a quiet cafe where the air smelled like steam and apologies. Jamie said, "I don't want to be a secret," I said, "then stop hiding in my questions." Her eyes softened and sharpened in the same breath. She said, "She reaches for me first." I felt a thread snap behind my ribs. I smiled because sorrow loves polite rooms. We discussed calendars like we were scheduling surgeries. Boundaries moved like furniture across a creaky floor. Jamie said, "You deserve whole love." I said, "And what do you deserve?" She answered, "To stop being an accident." I held the door when we left. The bell chimed like a verdict. Outside, the day smelled new and already used. Nights grew careful. We stacked tenderness like fragile dishes. Mara came home humming a tune that did not belong to us. I asked, "Are you happy?" She said, "I'm less afraid." It was not an answer, and it was the only answer. Cole checked in with bullet points and cautions. I nodded to each like a student begging for a pass. The bed learned new distances. Pillows made borders we respected like treaties. I said, "Tell me when you cross them." She said, "You will feel it first." I listened for the moment my heart would tilt. Jealousy became a weather system that never left the city. I tried gratitude as a remedy. I thanked the day for softness and found it thin. Mara said, "Don't measure me against ghosts." I said, "I'm measuring us against promises." We slept like neighbors who borrowed sugar and forgot to return it. In the dark, I practiced breathing until morning arrived empty and bright. The first real crack sounded small. Jamie posted a photo with a caption about courage. Mara liked it before breakfast. I watched the heart icon bloom like a bruise. I told myself this was normal. Cole said, public signals matter. I heard warning and pretended it was advice. I asked Mara to talk, not fight. She poured coffee like she was filling a moat. She said, I want this to stay beautiful. I said, beauty can hide a wound. We agreed to revisit the rules, which meant they were already breaking. My chest felt like a door leaning on a broken hinge. Jamie texted, "Are you okay?" I answered, "I am practicing." She wrote, "Me too." I stood by the window and listened to traffic unravel. In the glass, I looked like someone whose faith was a thin sheet. I said, "We can still have it all." The words left a cold trail. The city replied with sirens that sounded like a chorus of ifs. I thought naming the ache would ease it. Instead, it grew teeth. Cole said, "Structure will hold you." I said, "Structure can't hold what bleeds." Mara confessed. She liked the way Jamie saw her. I nodded, though it scalded. We shared coffee like it was medicine. Jamie's laugh echoed from a memory, not the room. I wanted to ask Mara to choose, but my mouth stayed shut. She said, "I want us all to survive this." I answered, "Surviving is not the same as living." Her eyes dropped, and silence filled the kitchen like smoke. The napkin rules felt like graffiti now, fading in rain. Cole texted a reminder of boundaries, as if boundaries were bandages. I leaned on the counter, steadying my ribs. Mara whispered, "Do you hate me?" I said, "I hate what love is doing to me." The words tasted sharp, and I swallowed before they cut deeper. We tried a walk, pretending fresh air could reset our hearts. The city moved fast, indifferent to us. Mara's hand brushed mine, then withdrew like it touched fire. I said, "Do you still want me?" She said, "I never stopped." The pause after was louder than her answer. People passed with umbrellas, their faces strangers, their lives intact. I watched her reflection in puddles, and it looked like someone leaving. Cole called, his voice strict, reminding us of the rules again. I lied and said everything was steady. Mara glanced at me and smiled with sorrow tucked behind her teeth. I wanted to tell her I was unraveling. Instead, I said, "Let's keep walking." The rain slicked our shoulders like warning signs. Every step felt like distance in disguise. Jamie invited me for coffee without Mara. I said yes, though my chest clenched. The cafe hummed with soft chatter. Jamie leaned forward and said, "She glows when she talks about you." I stared, searching for the lie. She added, "But she glows brighter with me." My breath caught. I said, "Do you want me to leave her?" She shook her head. "I want her whole. You keep half." Her words sliced clean. I laughed, but it cracked in the middle. Jamie touched my hand lightly, a gesture meant to comfort and expose. She said, "You deserve more than fractions." I wanted to hate her, but truth had her voice. We sat in quiet, coffee cooling, eyes locked, both carrying pieces of Mara like fragile glass. That night, the apartment turned into a courtroom. Cole sat across with his list of rules, his tone sharp. Mara sat near him, gaze lowered. I said, "Rules don't stop feelings." Cole said, "They stop destruction." Jamie stayed quiet, her presence louder than any word. I wanted to scream, but instead I whispered, "I am drowning." Mara touched my knee under the table, a silent plea. Cole's pen tapped like a gavel. He said, "We renegotiate, or we end it." The word "end" hung in the air, heavy, undeniable. My chest felt hollow, like someone had scooped out the marrow. I said, "Then let's renegotiate." It sounded like surrender dressed as strategy. Mara finally lifted her eyes and they glistened like confessions. After the meeting, I stood alone by the window. The city sparkled like it belonged to someone else. Mara joined me, her shoulder brushing mine. She said, "We can make this work." I whispered, "At what cost?" Jamie laughed softly in the background, not mocking but alive. Cole stacked his papers like verdicts closed. I felt like the last person standing in a collapsing house. Mara turned my face toward hers, eyes full of fire and guilt. She said, "I love you." I answered, "I know." The words were heavier than any silence. I wondered if knowing was enough. The window glass caught our reflection. Two people still together, but already fractured. The night outside carried our secret ache into the dark. I woke before dawn and counted the rules like prayers. The silence answered with small cracks. Mara said we should schedule nights to avoid overlap. The word schedule felt like a leash. I said, "Tell me what you want." She stared at the window until it fogged. She said, "I want ease without erasing you." The sentence tried to be kind and failed. My chest pressed against a wall I could not see. Jamie texted a sun emoji, like a dare. I typed 3 drafts and deleted them all. Cole said, "Honor your agreements and your limits." I did not know where one ended. I smiled through the ache, because hope needs oxygen. Mara reached for my hand and missed by an inch. She said, "Let me have tonight with her." I said, "Then take tomorrow with me." The bargain sat between us like cold tea. We nodded like officials signing a fragile treaty. The morning brightened and showed everything we had hidden. Evening arrived with a rehearsed smile. I cooked as if seasoning could solve math. Mara said, "Jamie will meet us after." The US thinned at the edges. I stirred sauce and avoided questions. Cole called and asked, "Are you resourced for this week?" I said, "Define resourced." He laughed without humor and repeated the plan. I plated dinner for 2 and a ghost. Mara said, "I want you to see we are real." I answered, "I see everything too clearly." We ate in careful bites. Her phone face down, pulsing like a trapped moth. I asked, "Are you in love?" She said, "I'm in something large, and it frightens me." I tasted metal behind the basil. The doorbell rang too soon. I said, "Let her in." My voice sounded like someone else. Mara squeezed my shoulder as if to bless me. The hallway breathed, and the night reshaped itself around our table. Jamie arrived with rain in her curls and bravery in her eyes. She said, "Thank you for dinner." I said, "Thank you for coming honest." We moved like actors in a delicate play. Mara poured wine with steady hands. Jamie said, "I want to be seen, not hidden." I nodded because hiding had turned me into fog. We spoke about time and touch as if they were permits. Cole's words echoed like traffic rules in my head. I said, "No sleepovers when it is my night." Jamie said, "Agreed, unless invited." Mara exhaled a tremor and smiled. I asked, "Are we safe here?" Jamie answered, "We are brave here." I envied her certainty and borrowed a little. We ate, we joked, we failed to relax. Under the table, my heel tapped a Morse code for mercy. Mara covered my knee, and the signal stopped. I said, "Let us try kindness with teeth." The room held its breath and kept us from breaking. Later dishes stacked like small negotiations. Jamie said, "Can I have Friday and Sunday this week?" I counted my heartbeats and failed. Mara looked to me as if I were weather. I said, "Friday, yes. Sunday, no, don't." Jamie's jaw tightened, then softened. She said, "I need more than scraps." The word scraps flashed like a flare. Mara whispered, "Please, we are building this." I said, "Then build with foundations, not favors." Silence swelled and nudged the glasses. Cole texted, "Check in when emotions surge." I wanted to throw my phone into the sink. Jamie stood and said, "I refuse to be convenient." I admired her courage and feared its cost. Mara reached for her, and then for me. We formed a crooked line that could not hold. I said, Choose the humane answer, not the easy one. The clock ticked like an anxious heart, and no one moved. The night ended on the stoop, with rain easing to mist. Jamie said, "Ask for what you need or you will resent us." I said, "I need to be chosen sometimes without calendar math." She nodded like a judge who understood the law and the wound. Mara stood between us, soaked in conflict. She said, "I will not abandon either of you." The word either felt like a coin flipping forever. I wanted to pocket it and never spend it. Jamie stepped closer and said, "If you cannot breathe, tell me to leave." I stared at the streetlight and measured my breath. I said, "Do not leave, just slow down." She touched my shoulder and let her hand fall. Mara threaded her fingers through mine and did not pull away. We were three silhouettes learning a dangerous dance. The door closed behind us with a tired click. I said, "Tomorrow, we try again." The mist swallowed our promise and saved no witness. The truth arrived like shattered glass across the floor. Jamie said, "We are not careful anymore." Mara froze, eyes wide, mouth half open. I said, "What happened?" Silence filled the room until Jamie whispered, "We broke your rule." I felt the air leave my lungs. Mara reached for me, but I stepped back. My voice cracked. "Which rule?" Jamie answered, "The night's." Cole's warning echoed like thunder through my skull. Mara said it was only once. I shouted, "Once is enough to end trust." The walls shook with the weight of the words. My heart sprinted into panic. I wanted to leave, but my feet nailed me down. Jamie's gaze did not waver. Mara's eyes flooded. I realized I was standing on the ashes of something I built with trembling hands. I said, "You shattered more than rules tonight." The confession spun in my ears like sirens. Mara said, "I didn't plan it." I said, "But you allowed it." Jamie cut in. She needed comfort. My laugh came broken, sharp as glass. I said, "And I needed honesty." Mara wept. "I love you both." I spat back, "Then love is no excuse." Cole arrived late, briefcase in hand, scanning the wreckage of our words. He said, "This is the cost of weak boundaries." I wanted to strike him with silence. Jamie crossed her arms, unyielding. Mara crumbled, knees drawn to chest. I said, "You made me a stranger in my own bed." My throat burned with fury. The room felt smaller, choking. Cole scribbled notes, detached. I screamed, "We are not a case study." My voice bounced off the walls and returned like judgment. After midnight, silence filled the apartment. Mara whispered, "I didn't want to lose her." I replied, "You lost me in the process." Jamie softened, voice trembling. "We wanted to keep you." I said, "By betraying me." Cole shook his head, muttering, "This structure is failing." I turned to him, furious. "This is not architecture. It is my heart." The words scorched my tongue. Mara reached across the table, fingers trembling, but I pulled away. My body felt carved in stone. Jamie said, "We can repair this." I answered, "You can't glue back trust." The weight of betrayal pressed like iron against my ribs. Mara sobbed into her palms. The room hummed with grief no one could silence. The twist cut deeper when Cole revealed Mara came to me before it happened. I turned like struck. "You knew," I accused. Mara stammered, "I only wanted advice." Jamie muttered, "She needed space, not rules." My stomach churned as if poisoned. Cole said, "I warned her this risk was real." I snarled, "And you let me walk blind." The betrayal multiplied in layers. Mara cried, "I thought I could handle it." I shouted, "You thought wrong." The storm outside clashed against the windows, like applause. Jamie whispered, "Don't punish her alone. I was there too." I answered, "You both chose silence." My voice cracked to a whisper, "You both chose against me." The room fell quiet, except for rain hammering glass. The night ended with me by the window, lightning splitting the skyline. Mara came near, whispering, "Please don't leave." I said, "You already left when you crossed that line." Jamie stood behind her, silent, tears rolling. Cole gathered his notes and said coldly, "You must decide." My hands trembled on the glass. I saw our reflections fractured by raindrops. Mara begged, "We can fix this." I answered, "Fixing a grave still leaves death." My chest collapsed with grief. Jamie whispered, "If one of us must go, let it be me." Mara cried harder, clutching her. I stepped away from the window. My voice emptied. "It's too late to choose without blood." The storm outside roared, a chorus for the ruins we had become. The night returned like a judge, unblinking and cold. Mara said, "I cannot keep apologizing and pretending it fixes us." My ribs tightened around a wordless animal. Jamie stood near the doorway, silent but burning. Cole arrived with his clipboard of mercy and rules. I said, "No more lists, only truth." Mara swallowed, then whispered, "I am in love with both of you." The room tilted like a ship in black water. Jamie said, "I will not be the shadow that eats you." I answered, "Then do not ask me to vanish." Cole said, "Name your boundaries as ultimatums." I looked at Mara and felt the floor thin beneath us. I said, "Choose integrity tonight, not comfort." She trembled and reached for my hand, then for Jamie's. The motion carved me open. I said, "If you hold both, you will lose me." The sentence landed like a thrown stone, and the silence cracked. Words flew like glass, bright and cutting. Mara said, "I chose wrong when I hid." I said, "You chose wrong when you soothed yourself with secrecy." Jamie stepped forward and said, "I pushed when I should have paused." The air felt charged with static and grief. Cole warned, "Speak from need, not blame." I said, "I need the truth to stop moving." Mara's face broke into rivers. She said, "I slept over again on your night." The floor groaned, or maybe it was me. Jamie flinched and said, "I asked her to stay because she was shaking." I whispered, "You both knew what that would cost me." The word cost echoed like stairs in a burning building. Cole sighed, "This is the cliff edge." I said, "Then watch me choose the ground or the fall." The night held its breath and waited for impact. I turned to the table where the napkin lay like a relic. I said, "These rules once felt holy." Cole said, "They were scaffolds, not saints." I lifted the napkin, and it tore along a coffee stain. Mara gasped as if skin had split. Jamie whispered, "End the performance and keep the love." I answered, "Performance is all that kept me standing." My hands shook, and the paper snowed down. Mara said, "Please, do not make this our ruin." I said, "It already is, unless we tell a different truth." Jamie asked, "What truth?" I breathed, and finally said, "I want monogamy with the person who chooses me." The sentence cracked like ice breaking free. Cole nodded once, solemn. Mara's eyes darted between us like a trapped bird. Jamie stepped back, fear and resolve twined. The night seemed to lean closer to hear the verdict. Mara's breath hitched, and she said, "If I choose you, I betray what I started with her." I said, "If you do not choose, you betray me again." Jamie's voice softened into steel. She said, "I will not accept half of a heart." Cole murmured, "Triage demands priority or loss." I felt a tremor pass through my knees. Mara looked at Jamie, and then at me, and grief lived in both glances. She said, "I am terrified of ending any love." I said, "Then you will end every love." The truth rose like a wave and slammed the room. Jamie wiped her face and said, "Say who you are when no one is watching." Mara closed her eyes and silence thickened. I counted to 10 like a child in a thunderstorm. She opened them and met my gaze, and I braced for the strike I had invited. The climax arrived and did not blink. Mara said, "I choose Jamie tonight, and I choose you or to leave." The line split the air with surgical precision. My chest emptied like a room after a fire alarm. Jamie whispered, "I did not ask for that cut, but I will not step back." Cole exhaled and said, "Decisions create futures." I said, "Then, hear mine." The words gathered around my teeth like storm crows. I said, "I cannot share what begs to be singular." Silence staggered, then stood taller. Mara reached toward me and stopped at the edge of my refusal. Jamie held her hand, steady and brave. I felt the world tilt and lock into a new orbit. I said, "I am leaving tonight." The sentence stitched pain into final shape. The lamp hummed like a low choir while our house changed names. The apartment looked like a battlefield after the war. My suitcase waited by the door, swollen with more grief than clothes. Mara said, "Don't go tonight, let the storm pass." I said, "The storm already passed and left us in ruins." Jamie stood behind her, face pale, lips pressed thin. Cole sat in silence, no rules left to write. I felt the floor beneath me shift, as if it wanted me gone. Mara begged, "Stay, at least until morning." I whispered, "If I stay, I betray myself." The silence that followed was thicker than any wall. Jamie finally said, "Then go, but don't pretend love did not exist here." My throat tightened. I answered, "Love existed, and that is why it hurts." I gripped the handle, my hand trembling with both relief and devastation. The night opened its mouth to swallow me whole. Outside, the rain had softened into a drizzle, but my chest still thundered. Mara followed to the stoop, barefoot, shivering. She whispered, "I never wanted to lose you." I said, "You lost me when you forgot the weight of honesty." Jamie stood in the doorway, her shadow long against the floor. Cole lingered inside, ghost-like. Mara reached for me and pulled back before contact. I said, "Do not ask me to carry what you chose to break." She cried, "I love you." I shook my head and answered, "Then let that love be enough to set me free." The streetlight flickered, painting the night in broken pulses. Every heartbeat felt like a final drum. I walked down the street, and each step cracked like glass. Mara called after me, her voice splitting in the rain, but I didn't turn. Jamie shouted too, but her voice was steadier, like steel. I kept moving until their words dissolved in the distance. Cole texted, "Check in when safe." I turned my phone face down, the glow bleeding through my pocket. My mind replayed the moment Mara admitted what I had feared for weeks. The betrayal folded into every shadow. I whispered to myself, "I asked for love, not survival." The city streets were empty, but every window felt like an audience. My breath clouded in the night, and the ache grew heavier with every block. I stopped only when my legs shook. The rain eased to mist, but nothing eased inside me. By the time I reached the hotel, dawn threatened the horizon. The lobby smelled like bleach and false comfort. I checked in with a voice I barely recognized. The clerk asked, "One night or longer?" I said, "I don't know yet." The words tasted hollow. I dragged the suitcase to a silent room with white sheets and humming air. I collapsed on the bed without undressing. Mara's face burned on my eyelids. Jamie's voice lingered in my ears. Cole's rules echoed like a cruel lullaby. I pressed my palms over my eyes until sparks flashed. I whispered, "I chose to leave. So why does it feel like I was abandoned?" The ceiling answered with nothing. The bed groaned under my grief, a witness I had not asked for. I fell asleep with tears drying into salt maps on my cheeks. Morning arrived too bright, cutting through the blinds like knives. My phone buzzed with Mara's messages, long paragraphs, desperate pleas. Jamie's single text read, "I am sorry." Cole sent bullet points titled "Next Steps." I stared until letters blurred. I thought about going back, about forgiving, about breaking myself all over again. My chest said no. My loneliness said yes. I whispered, "There is no map for this. I stood at the window, city alive and indifferent. Cars honked, people laughed, the world moved on while I was stuck in yesterday's wreckage. I pressed my forehead to the glass and felt its chill ground me. I said aloud, "I will not return to the ruins." The words didn't heal, but they steadied. My reflection looked hollow but still standing. Morning found me in a laundromat that smelled like steam and second chances. I folded shirts like I was restoring borders. I said, "I will make a life that needs fewer apologies." My phone buzzed, and I let it buzz until silence returned. A child laughed near the vending machine, and it did not break me. I remembered Mara's trembling hands and Jamie's steady spine. I wanted to hate them and found only weathered love. Cole had written me a single sentence, "Choose what grows you." I whispered, "I will." The washer clicked to a stop like a small verdict. I packed the warm fabric and felt something unclench. I stepped outside, and the air tasted like rain that had learned restraint. I said, "I can carry my name without splitting it." The street answered with an ordinary breeze, and it felt holy. I met Cole at a small park where leaves argued with wind. He said, "You look steadier." I answered, "Steady is the shape of my grief now." We walked without agenda, feet scuffing the path. He said, "Do you want closure?" I said, "I want truth and a door that opens forward." He nodded and offered no rules, only company. I admitted I missed Mara's laugh and Jamie's courage. He said, "Missing is not a contract." We sat on a damp bench and watched a dog chase nothing and win. I realized I did not owe pain an altar. I said, "I will mourn what was possible and keep what is real." He smiled like relief had muscle. When we stood to leave, the light broke through cloud in thin gold stripes. I said, "That is enough for today," and believed it. Jamie asked to meet near the river, where the wind tells the truth. I agreed because endings deserve light. She said, "I thought love could multiply without remainder." I said it did, but it divided me. Her eyes shone and did not flinch. She added, "I will keep her safe if she lets me." I said, "Keep her honest first." We stood with our hands hidden in our coats like contraband feelings. She said, "You were never the enemy." I answered, "I was the mirror," and I cracked. A gull split the sky and stitched it back together. Jamie stepped closer and said, "May your next yes be singular and brave." I said, "May yours be whole and kind." We parted without touching, both lighter and sad. The river kept moving and refused all monuments. Mara came to the hotel lobby with a paper bag of oranges and an apology that would not stop trembling. She said, "I broke what I did not know how to hold." I said, "I broke too by staying past the breaking." We sat in chairs that pretended to be comfortable. She whispered, "I chose badly and slowly." I said, "You chose humanly, and it still hurt." She smiled like a bruise learning to fade. She said, "I will not ask you to return." I answered, "I will not ask you to regret love." We peeled one orange and split the slices like truce. She said, "Thank you for not making me a villain." I said, "Thank you for not making me a ghost." We hugged once, careful as glass, and let go before shatter. When she left, the scent of citrus stayed and felt like mercy. On the last night, I stood on a roof and counted the city lights like possible futures. I said she told me we could have it all. The wind waited for the rest. I added, "All is not the same as enough." My chest loosened like a knot, remembering how to open. I sent a message to myself that read, "Do not bargain your worth for permission." The screen glowed like a small altar, and then went dark. Somewhere below, a siren wailed and kept going toward another kind of ruin. I breathed until the night matched my lungs. I said I forgive the dream, and I released the ache. The words did not echo. They settled. The sky held its silence, and in that silence I finally felt chosen by the only person left to choose me.